All right, for those of you that are members of Lodge Research, thank you for joining in. Those of you that are joining in as a guest this evening, thank you especially. I do want to remind everyone and let those know that aren't members with us that these sessions are recorded. And as a member, you are able to, I'm getting some feedback, just one second, going to mute everybody. There we go. So as members, you are able to log into the Kansas Lodge Research membership portal on our website, and you're able to access this video or the recording of this video and all the rest of them at any time. So if you miss a meeting, you can always get caught up. If you want to go back and catch highlights, you can do that as well, which ends up being a great benefit of membership. So as I said, this is going to be our second annual exit interview of the Grandmaster. We had a really good turnout and a really good discussion last year. So I'm very excited to be able to repeat that with this year's sitting Grandmaster, Most Worshipful Mikel Stoops. Very excited to be able to have that conversation of working through his Masonic legacy, where he's gone from the beginning, how he's got where he's at, how Grandmaster impacted him, and views for the future. And this is also your chance to get your questions asked as well. Brother Robert Johnson here is going to be fielding questions this evening. It's really hard in a setting like this to jump back and forth and turn people's audio on and deal with all that. So if you don't mind, in the chat feature of Zoom here, you can either shoot a public question or shoot it directly to Brother Robert, and he will make sure that question gets asked, and we'll make our Grandmaster a little comfortable, make him have to answer all of these as well. So, all right, before we get started, Most Worshipful, any comments?
No, just thanks for having me tonight. Everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Perfect.
I'm not sure whose mic it's coming from. Sounds like it went away, though. We'll keep an eye on it. Sorry, guys. All right, well, Most Worshipful, kind of the course we want to travel with this, and obviously we'll have more questions that pop up as we go along and throw those in with you, but we really want to get to know you as a whole. So this project kind of started where we were talking about the fact that we haven't interviewed our past Grandmasters. And as a project, we're doing that on the side, trying to interview these guys before something bad happens to them. And that's hard to keep up with. So we're trying to offset that.
Are you foretelling something in my near future?
Oh, man, you know, hopefully not near future, but as always, we're trying to offset that with our outgoing Grandmasters by having that conversation in real time with them. And eventually we'll get caught up on all of our past Grandmasters as well. So we want to kind of go on that route of not just putting you in the hot seat of current questions, but getting to know your story as a whole. So I guess let's start out with what brought you into this journey of Freemasonry.
So as a young child, my grandfather, I knew he was a Mason. Bill Johnson was his name. He was a Mason in Ohio. And I grew up in Indiana, so I didn't get to visit with Grandpa very much. But, you know, I knew he was a Mason. I knew he always went to church. If we visited him on the weekend, we all hopped in the car and we went to church. He was active in his community, politically, charity-wise and everything. And so I knew he was a pretty good guy. And he always told me, you know, if you want to join Masonry, let me know and I'll pay your initiation fees and I want to be there for your degree work. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind that, you know, someday maybe I would want to be a Mason. But I was busy. Life gets in the way of a lot of things. 3 kids, one season of soccer, I coached 5 teams and my son played on 2 others. So that's covering 7 games over the course of the weekend, every weekend. So I was a busy guy. I just really didn't have time for much outside of family. It got to the point where the kids were, 2 of them had gone to college. One was still in high school. Things were slowing down. And I felt like, okay, now I have time for something else in my life. So just happened to run across a friend from work at a Christmas party and he had a Shriner pin on. I said, "Oh, you're a Mason." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Most people don't know that." I'm like, "No, my grandpa's a Shriner. So I know you're a Mason. I think maybe I'd like to join." And he thought I was joking. And I got with him the next week at work and I'm like, no, Duke, I really think I want to join Masonry. You know, I know quite a bit about it and I'd like to join. He goes, "Well, why don't you join the Lenexa Lodge? You only live like 8 blocks from it." And I said, I don't know anybody at Lenexa Lodge. I want to join your lodge. At least I know somebody there. So
Hmm.
that was kind of why. Was that Grandpa showed me that Masons were good people. Every Mason I met along my career and everything, they always seemed to be good people. And it was something I wanted to look into when I finally had time in my life for something other than kids, family, and career. I needed something else to round me out, and that was it. And talked to Duke again, and the rest is kind of history. I joined DeSoto Lodge, and off I went. So
Definitely. So that's an interesting point because used to the way it was in Freemasonry here in Kansas and many other jurisdictions is that each lodge kind of had their own jurisdiction in between lodges. So you were pretty much forced, if you lived near Lenexa, that's the lodge you would go to. In today's world, we often advocate that, you need to search around and find the lodge that best fits you. So if that was still the situation, how do you think that would have impacted you being forced into one certain lodge that you didn't know anybody at?
I think I would have still pursued it. I don't know if it would have been the right fit for me. Nothing against the guys at Lenexa. I visit with them. I know several of them, and I think it still would have worked out. But DeSoto seems like home. It was the right place at the right time for me.
Definitely. Great answer. So you mentioned early on there, you saw a Shriner pin, and that's kind of what caught your eye into masonry. Uh, did you have ambitions to get involved with Shriners, or what were your thoughts there?
I thought I probably would become a Shriner sometime. Grandpa was very active in the Shrine. He was the treasurer of his Shrine Club. He was still an ambassador for his Shrine Club when he passed away at the age of 78, I think it was. And so he was active in the Shrine, and I thought it might be something I'd get into eventually. And my path just hasn't taken me there. I got in the Blue Lodge, loved what I found there, started becoming more educated in the basis of masonry that we find there, and that's taken up all my time. So uh, most of you people on the call here know me. I don't join something just to hold a membership card, and so if I can't become active in it, I'm not going to join it just to have a card in my pocket. And Shrine, Scottish Rite, York Rite. At this point in my life, I'm busy enough with Blue Lodge, quite frankly. Maybe someday, I'm not going to rule it out, but Blue Lodge is where it's at for the foundation, and we need to build that foundation, and that's what I've been working on.
100%. So with that foundation you mentioned, coming into Freemasonry, obviously you have the craft degrees to go through. And that's an impactful experience going from a profane life, an outsider, I guess you could say, into an enlightened path onto your journey. Tell me a little bit about your memories of going through those first 3 degrees and your experience in Lodge in that time.
Um, so I'll go for the funny things first because they come to mind
Great.
first. I remember being blindfolded on my entered apprentice degree, and realizing very quickly that I was being walked around the room, right? So I started counting steps so I knew where to turn without him telling me where to turn. I don't know. And my brain works that way when I'm blindfolded. I wanted to know my environment, and that was the only thing that was relating to me in that environment at the time was how many steps I was taking before I needed to turn. So so strange things like that happen. It was but my grandfather didn't get to be at my degrees. He had gotten ill, and so he didn't get to come to my degree work. But it was impactful. Um, I think from a learning and educational standpoint, I think the second the stair lecture of the second degree was probably most impactful educationally. There was a lot there, and it was presented in such a way that I was able to comprehend a lot of it at the time it was being delivered. Some of the lectures, quite frankly, I think we can do better. Having a guy standing across the room from us giving us a lecture with at that time it was a noisy slide projector from the 1960s that was in my ear as these slides are coming up, and they're all crooked and one's upside down, and you know we could do better, and we do better now at DeSoto. We've changed that. As far as the biggest impact was definitely the second section of the third degree. It was I purposely stayed away from stuff online, so I didn't really know what was coming. Um, And at that time in my life, I was doing some martial arts, not a lot, but I was into martial arts with my family. And when the first guy stopped me, it's a good thing the senior deacon had a hold of me, because I popped back into a fighting stance, and he's like, no, 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 it's okay. So, but yeah, they were a little more careful the second, third time they hit me.
That's fantastic. So you're talking about, impactful degrees through your experience, and
Yeah.
kind of 2 points here. I want to point out to everyone listening. Last year when we did this, I had a brother reach out because we did the same thing, went through the degree process and talked about the experience there, and it impacted this brother in the fact of, wow, they went through the same experience as me. And I think oftentimes with the factor of grandmaster, there's just that pedestal, and you kind of forget that he went through those same
Yeah.
experiences, and there was some bad and there was some good, and just as you experience, we all experience. So it's definitely a humbling and level factor. But as you mentioned impactful degrees, it recalls my memory back to the stair lecture, which you mentioned. And for me, that was hugely impactful because I didn't know it was part of the degree. Like everything else was so, they did a great job, but so scripted. You could tell. And when it came to the second or the stair lecture, brother came over and put his arm or his hand on my shoulder and just started talking to me. And I thought it was a side conversation, and I was really engaged. And out of everything, that stuck with me so much. And when I found out that that was actually part of the ritual, it blew my mind of how well he did. Do you recall through your degrees somebody that impacted you in that way that just kind of hit you with a little bit of a wow factor?
Um, so I was very fortunate to go through my degree work at DeSoto, and we had a plethora of very proficient brothers at that
Mm.
time. Still do, but some have passed away now. Um, it, the second section, the stair lecture, was given by Bob Mann, and it was now I know it was word perfect. But as you said, it was that it one-on-one, basically, that conversation, and I really appreciated that. Bob Reddick, sitting in the East as King Solomon with that voice, and Bob's passed away now. So yeah.
I think every lodge can relate to that feeling because every lodge has that brother.
Yeah.
Maybe several of them, but we all at least have that brother that has definitely impacted or held that substantial spot in the lodge that we can all relate that kind of a feeling and brotherly love and affection to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Bob, when he said, well, you may think you're a Mason, but you're not. Boy, how about just turn around and walk down. I didn't know what to do. He just had this presence and voice about him. Yeah. So
So getting through the degrees, you've hit your entered apprentice,
yeah.
passed on to your fellow craft, and then raised as a master mason. Where was your mind at that time when you received your master mason degree and you were declared a master mason? What was going on with you?
Well, some people on the call know, but a lot of you probably don't. I didn't have to do any proficiency work. At the time in DeSoto, there had been the one-day classes in Kansas, and they decided that if those guys didn't have to do proficiency and prove up, our people don't either. So I didn't have to do any proficiency or memory work. And that was a conversation I had with my grandpa. He actually asked me if I was joining a clandestine lodge, because he's like, well, it's Mike, it's $40 and you don't have to do any memory work. And I'm like, no. He goes, I don't think you're joining a real lodge. And so, but no, I figured it out that I was joining a real lodge. But that idea of not having to do that memory work and
Mm.
finding out during my degree process that I really should have been, even brought it to some people's attention that, shouldn't I be doing this? They're like, no, we don't do that anymore. And so, as impactful as becoming a master mason was, I felt like I had missed out on something. And so I had lost part of the value of becoming a master mason in my mind, because I didn't have to do those things that for centuries we've been doing. And, quite frankly, at the time in DeSoto, a lot of our meetings were kind of boring. We'd come in, we'd open, we'd talk about the minutes and the bills, we'd still read them. Talk about who's going to clean the floor next time. We talk about, do we want to spend $60 to get somebody up here once a month to vacuum? There's a roof leak. We thank the brother for the pasta that they made for the meal that night. Talk about who's sick, who's passed away, and we'd close. And so, I became a master mason. I knew I missed out on something with my proficiency work. And quite frankly, most of our meetings were just boring business meetings. And it wasn't 3 or 4 months after I become a master mason, I really had a struggle one night. It was lodge night, and I wanted to be involved. And I just thought to myself, what does it mean to be a master mason? What does it mean to be a mason in general? Because I'm not getting it right now. And so, as great as those degrees were and as impactful as they were in the initiatic experience, the rest of what I saw didn't hold the same value in my mind. The value wasn't there. And luckily for me, and hopefully luckily for Kansas, some will disagree with that, I'm sure, I stuck with it. I knew there had to be something else there. If it's been around for all these years, if Grandpa was so dedicated, if all these other brothers are so dedicated, there has to be more than what I'm currently seeing. And so I personally set out to educate myself on what Masonry should be, what it truly is, and how can we revive some of our meetings and make them more interesting. And so I know I went way past what you just asked me, but
no, that's great.
That step from becoming a master mason till 2 months later, where I didn't even know if I wanted to stay in the fraternity, that was a crucial step in my Masonic career. And I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did. And 20% of the Kansas Masons are glad I did. So
worshipful Stoops. I wanted to ask, just I had a similar issue going through where there were a lot of the degree work was fantastic. However, the meetings left something to be desired. There was competition in how fast they could do it. One time, I used to ride my bike to lodge. We got over and done with in 17 minutes. And I thought, what is this, right? And for you, you said it took about 3 months or whatever. You had this kind of fall off. What changed? What snapped to you to say, you know what, I got to change something?
I just made a personal commitment that I would figure it out for myself, if nothing else. And that's really where I started digging into my Masonic education and finding out, what do these lectures mean? What do these words that everybody's memorized, what do they mean? Why do we say them? We're using arcane language. What does anybody even know why we're using arcane language? No, that's the way we've always done it. Well, okay. So I made the personal commitment that I was going to stay in Masonry and figure it out for myself. And if I couldn't find anything, I probably would have walked away. But thank goodness there's plenty of stuff to find. Just digging into our ritual. The little paragraph on the apron, I can give a 45-minute presentation on that little paragraph. There's so much in there. If you just look for it, it's there. It's an entire educational system within our ritual.
I fully agree with you. So, not to jump too far forward, but I'm going to ask you kind of a today question, and I still want to go back and cover some of your journey here. But you're mentioning going through the degrees, kind of what you've noticed there about lack of proficiency. And the hard-hitting fact that your own grandfather questioned you joining a clandestine lodge for some of the practices. Jumping fast forward, I guess, into today's role as a sitting Grand Master with other jurisdictions. For example, there's a neighboring jurisdiction. We're not going to get into names because that goes beyond the point of this. We had traveled to a neighboring jurisdiction to see a brother's initiation, and we found out they don't actually do those. All they do is kind of a one day thing and there is no proficiency. You don't need to do any of that. You just show up and you're good. And we were really thrown by, and the brother, persisted. I've heard so much about it. I really want to go through it. And their reply was, well, we'd have to learn it first. You're gonna have to give us some time. As a grandmaster in today's world, thinking about jurisdictional recognition and all that, how does that sit with you? And basically, is it an issue in your mind, jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
It's absolutely an issue. I'm the grand representative for another Midwest state. As grandmaster, I did enforce the bylaw that says all the grand representatives should turn in an annual report about their jurisdiction that they represent. I did the same. And quite frankly, in my report, based on that jurisdiction's penchant for having one-day classes, 58% of their Masons in the last 2 decades went through one-day classes. I actually recommended that we may need to look in their regularity and see if we should still be recognizing them or not. So at some point, you go so far past the standards that we've set for 300 or more years that it's no longer Masonry. And it's okay. It's something else. You can do it. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's not regular Masonry anymore. And whether a regular Masonic jurisdiction to recognize that's going to be a tough question down the road. And I think it's going to come up more and more.
Definitely. Thank you for touching on that. To kind of refocus back to understanding your path coming into where you're at today, we had touched on you going through the degrees, and I kind of want to have a 2-part question as far as, did you have someone in your lodge that acted as a mentor, maybe not just an assigned, but someone that really, helped guide you through that path? And then also, if you can tell us some of the memories of going through the officer line within your lodge and what that did for you.
So I don't really think I had an assigned mentor. If I did, I didn't know it. There were a few guys that were always around to answer some questions. It was kind of sink or swim a lot of times. It was, well, what do I need to learn? And they're like, well, learn this lecture. Okay, so I learned the lecture. That was the longest lecture in the book. I think they were just testing me to see if I could learn it, and I did. So I don't recall that mentorship type coaching thing that I would want to see, but that's just not the way our lodge has done it. So it's right, wrong, or indifferent. It really wasn't there. Doesn't mean to say that there weren't very knowledgeable brothers in that lodge who I could go to and ask questions of. There definitely were, but there was not a mentor-mentee type relationship set up, really. Definitely.
Before you jump into memories of going through the officer line in your lodge, touching on that fact of the mentorship, do you think that plays a valuable role, and should we kind of push more on that? Because I know in a lot of cases, especially in, well, can't say so much in my case because my father-in-law took that on, but in a few other guys that I had seen enter the lodge and were assigned that role, it was merely, are you ready for the next degree yet? Yeah. Do you have this memorized? And I don't know if that really bridges the definition of mentorship and guiding that path, but I want to get your thoughts on what you think that role is and how important it is in today's Masonry.
I think there's 2 roles, actually. I think the lodge should assign a coach, and I think we should call it that, a coach. And that's the person who you work with on your memory work and the understanding of the signs and do guards and the etiquette of the lodge, things like that. And that's a coach. That's a coach type relationship. That's not a mentor-mentee relationship. Mentor-mentee relationships have to be organic. They really grow out of a friendship and a understanding between the 2 people. And unless a lodge is going to spend the time, which I think they should, in preparing to bring that person in as a candidate, if they have to come to 6, 7, 8, 9 dinners, functions with the lodge, and they build a relationship with a few of the brothers there, even before they get their petition handed to them, maybe then you're in a mentor-mentee relationship because you've had time to build that. But if you're just going to go, hey, this guy turned in his petition, we saw him at the last CHIPS event, let's vote on him, yes, bring him in, there's no organic relationship being built there. And so you're really only assigning a coach. Hopefully that coach is able to take on that role and maybe build that relationship as a mentor. But if they don't, maybe somebody else in the lodge does. But part of it's about lodge culture as well. If the person is joining a lodge that they're going to be suited for, and the lodge is going to be suited for them, then there are people in there that will build that mentor-mentee relationship organically. But you have to have the right personality of the person to match the personality of the lodge in order for that to happen well. And quite frankly, we don't do that very well sometimes. First lodge they come to, that's the one they petition, that's the one that brings them in. Sometimes that may not be the right lodge. It's okay to go, you know what? It sounds like you're really into the esoteric side of things. We're kind of a service lodge here and we do a lot of charity work. We're not really into the esoteric side, but Lodge XYZ, just 15 minutes away from us, there are a bunch of Harry Potter wizard masons over there. Why don't you go visit with them for a while? Then you can build those relationships, but we don't do that. We're really bad at that. It's okay to tell somebody this may not be the right lodge for you. So anyway, off on another tangent. Sorry.
Most worshipful. I've been capturing some of the questions here, well, all of them anyway. A few of them that have come up, I think it would be better to bring up more toward the end of the interview. But I did want to ask you this one in particular. One thing that Brother Justin Stanley asked, he said, what is something you learned as your time in the Grand East that you didn't expect, not that you didn't expect to learn, but that you learned and maybe were taken aback by, or had an epiphany moment? What was something to that effect?
That's an interesting question. What I probably learned and was taken aback by the most was some of the unmasonic responses that I received, both in and out of lodge, to me simply upholding the obligation I took as Grand Master. That being that I would make sure the bylaws were adhered to and followed within this jurisdiction. And it was simple things like, I understand that your lodge doesn't want to meet in January. However, the Grand Lodge bylaw says your lodge has to meet in January. Please fix this oversight in your lodge bylaws. And just the unmasonic conduct of some of the brothers for such a simple thing as that. That's not a good thing to learn, but it's something I learned. So
that leads kind of into another question somebody asked, Brother Chris Stebbins, because you touched on this idea of upholding the Constitution's bylaws and things. Chris Stebbins asked, of the many responsibilities that come to the Grand Master, what do you think is the most important function of a Grand Master today? Or if it's not a function, is it a responsibility that is not really a codified function?
I think it depends on the situation within the jurisdiction and the previous leadership. In the situation we're in Kansas, no disrespect to anybody that came before me, but we have gone very far away from enforcing our laws, rules, regulations, and usages to where people feel that it's their right to just throw those bylaws out the window and not even be concerned about them. And everybody that knows me knows I'm kind of a rules guy. If it's a rule and you don't like it, try to change it. If you can't change it, then follow it. That's just the way I am. And so I took it upon myself as my role was that simple phrase and the obligation that I would see that the Constitution and bylaws of this jurisdiction were upheld and adhered to. It's not the exact words, but that's what it meant. Because I think that's the basis of moving forward is we have to get back to a level playing field where everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And if if that isn't our obligations, our charges of our degrees, and our written rules and regulations, then I don't know what it is. But that's what I wanted to get back to, was that base level of everybody knows what they're supposed to do and does it, and then we can grow from there. It's going to be different for different people in other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions are great about following their bylaws and regulations, and they're strictly enforced and adhered to. And so the role of the Grand Master doesn't have to be that for that jurisdiction. It can be more educational, more leading the craft with special projects in some cases. Thankfully in Kansas, I don't have to have special projects. Our strategic plan sets our projects, and they just roll on from year to year, and we readdress them and revamp them as we go. But the leadership structure in the system in Kansas is different. And so I can only speak for what I thought I needed to do based on where we currently are in Kansas. And we need to get back to that baseline of adhering to our obligations, our charges, our laws, rules, and regulations. And that was the big emphasis I really had this year.
Well said. Thank you so much.
To continue on that point just slightly, I know you said you were shocked by the unmasonic conduct. Did you find it amusing at all as you come into literally the elected head of a body that is in charge with upkeeping all these rules and regulations that have come into place, and you're scrutinized for doing exactly that?
It was humorous at times. If you can't laugh at it, then you're going to cry about it. And so I had to laugh at it, quite frankly. There was one situation where I was called Trump in the lodge. I was not so vaguely, basically they read an article about Hitler and tyranny, and it was pretty clear that they were talking about me, not Hitler and tyranny. And so at the end of that, they're like, do you have any response to that? And I said, yes. Could you please read section 2 of Article 3 of your own lodge bylaws? And it was, we will adhere to the laws, rules, regulations of the Grand Lodge and the Grand Master of this time, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't know what else you need to know. And I just laughed it off, So.
That's a great point. So kind of to guide back into getting to know your journey here, we're kind of at the point of you've been raised as a master mason, and now you're entering into the first form of leadership you've ever known within the Masonic institution as an officer and within your lodge. Can you kind of guide us through any memories, anything that stands out, and biggest things you learned from your time as an officer in your home lodge?
I wish I could say I learned to say no, but I didn't. I was 6 months after I was raised, I was junior steward. A year later, I was junior warden. And within, 3 years there, I was master of the lodge in 2013. So I jumped from the youngest guy, newest guy in the lodge to master of the lodge in 4 years.
Wow.
What I learned about leadership within Masonry during that time, probably not a lot. It was too fast, too much, too quick. So, I was already in leadership positions in my career, so I was actually transferring more of that knowledge into what I was doing in lodge. Then lodge was helping me be a better leader. Quite frankly, it was the other way around. So 2013 was the 150th anniversary of DeSoto Lodge, and I was master for that. I was also Grand Marshal at the same time that year. And so that was my first appointment to a Grand Lodge office. And we put on what I think was probably one of the most well-attended lodge rededications I've seen. We had 150 people there.
Wow.
We had to rent the community center to house everybody for the meal. Rick Reichert will tell you the story. He was Grand Master, and he showed up, and I'd drawn chalk squares on the sidewalk out in front of the building and had the officers' positions in the chalk squares, so everybody knew where to stand. that's just the level of detail I was with leadership and scheduling and events and these kind of things. So as far as learning anything from Masonic leadership, I did learn more about dealing with a volunteer group, because all my other leadership experience had been in a business work environment where people are paid to be there. And so it was a little different learning those kind of ins and outs of dealing with volunteers, because nobody has to come to Lodge.
Right.
You're coming because you see value in coming to Lodge. And if you don't see that value, you don't come to Lodge. And so it was important for me to try to figure out ways to increase that value of people coming to Lodge. 2013 was the first year in I don't know how long that our people coming in had to prove up. I wasn't going to sit in the East and have that taken away from somebody else that was stolen from me, because that's what I felt it was. My initiatic experience, that memory work, that proficiency work, that part of it was stolen from me, and I wasn't going to be part of stealing that from somebody. So we started back on our proficiency path. But learning to deal with volunteers, that was probably what I learned. And maybe I didn't learn it very well, but I'm still learning.
Most worshipful brother Darren Kellerman, he actually asked a question that I think is likely. He stacked the deck, maybe. He's asking a question that is always of a sensitive nature, no matter what grand jurisdiction we're in. And it relates to the relationship between the Kansas Grand Lodge and Kansas Prince Hall Grand Lodge.
Oh,
can you speak to this a bit?
Oh, yeah. I think we have an excellent relationship. I mean, there's some tension between any grand jurisdictions, and you feel that from time to time, but several great moments with me and Prince Hall brothers. The one that probably was the most meaningful for me is one that a lot of people don't know about, and I visited their Prince Hall annual communication. I don't know what I was at the time, maybe an area deputy or something, and I just wanted to go. I think it was the year after we did the rededication of the Capitol building. And I was sitting there, I stayed overnight, I was eating breakfast, just a 2-person table by myself. And Most Worshipful Coleman, their sitting Grand Master, walked past everybody else in the room and sat down and ate with me. And he said, "Brother, I don't want to see anybody eat alone." And, I was like, well, thank you. And I mean, he could have sat with anybody, but he chose to walk past every one of those brothers and sat down with me because I was eating alone. And that's just brotherly love right there. That's all that is. And, he and I have a great relationship. Brother Winbush, I didn't get to go to their annual communication because of COVID, but I stopped by and gave him a few gifts and gave him a personal letter that he read during the annual communication. And so I think of all the things we've done together, and I wish we would do more. I think COVID slowed us down. We had the joint degree, we had the joint rededication of the Capitol building. We had the table lodge. I missed the table lodge. I didn't get to go to it. That's one of the things I didn't get to go to. The infamous toast to the ladies of the evening that night was probably a memorable toast for everyone that was in attendance. For those of you that don't know the story, there was a toast to the guests, and the ladies and guests of the evening was how the toast was worded. Well, since we were all brothers there that night, the 2 Grand Masters got together and said, I think it was actually Brother Winbush was giving the toast. Just cross out guests, because there's no guests here tonight. And so he crossed out guests in the toast and proceeded to give the toast to the ladies of the evening. So
I remember that got quite a response in the room as well.
And where else can brothers get together and do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's a great relationship. It's still one that we need to foster and build. We can't just sit back on our laurels. We have to continue down that path of working at it. It still takes work to maintain that friendship and relationship. So
at the point of let's see, we're talking about going through your lodge as an officer of your lodge. At that point in your Masonic career, where were your ambitions? And not to put this on an ego factor, but did you foresee excelling up to the point of, district deputy, area deputy,
No.
even a grand line, or what was kind of your goal in Masonry at that point?
My goal was in 2013 as Master of the Lodge was to put on the best rededication ceremony we could do for our lodge and get our lodge in a great position moving forward with more proficiency. I instituted education at some of the meetings, just kind of got my lodge working, and that was really all I was thinking about. It was a great honor to be Grand Marshal, and I hope I did that to the best of my ability. I was also the year before I was part of the strategic planning committee for Grand Lodge. So I had met with some other people from across the state and set the strategic plan for Grand Lodge. But other than that, I had no ambitions, no focus on anything more than what I was currently doing and just making myself and my lodge better.
That's wonderful. Now, I kind of want to jump a little bit. You've gone through as an officer of the lodge, and then of course we all hit the East, and that's a big deal, and that's a lot to take on, especially in your case, as you've mentioned, you had this kind of express ride from the low chairs up to running the lodge. You're the head guy. What was going through your mind when you were elected master of your home lodge?
I knew it was going to happen. I mean, it's kind of a progressive thing within DeSoto as it is in most lodges. So it wasn't a shock. The shock was the night where the Grand Junior Warden dropped out and I was elected Grand not Grand. back to DeSoto, where the Junior Warden of DeSoto dropped out. And so they advanced somebody else to senior and put me in at junior. That was the shock. That came out of left field. I wasn't even there that night. They called me on the phone and said, "Will you take this office?" And I'm like, I guess. So that was the learning curve. There was that one. The election to master was, I'd already planned for it. I already knew that it was our 150-year rededication coming up. All those things were already in the works. We developed a pin. A lot of things were already in motion to get that through. Sure. And so taking over as master was just a continuation of the process that was already set in place, really.
Did you experience any bit of shock going into the master chair? Like, for example, when I was progressing through the chairs, you definitely get the sense where you can kind of recite word for word as they're going on and their opening rituals and yada, yada. But then you get to the master's chair and all of a sudden you're not a support factor. You're the spotlight and everything's on you and everyone's looking at you like you got it. Did you have an oh crap moment, or were you set up pretty firm at that point that you were smooth to go?
I'm sure there was one or two nights where I forgot a word or something and probably commented how hot it gets in the East under that hat, but everybody does that. I mean, it's just the way it is. So
what about some knowledge you would say you gained from your time as master that has stuck with you to today?
It's definitely that dealing with the volunteer group and making sure that they are seeing the value in coming to lodge. And we say it during the opening and closing of every meeting. What's master supposed to do? Well, he's supposed to give everybody a job and give them instruction on how to do the job. There's a reason for that. If people aren't engaged in working in the lodge, then they don't see the value in being part of that lodge. And so I had to learn, especially with the younger guys coming in, was when they come in, you have to give them something to do. They're not just going to show up at the meetings and sit on the sidelines every month if you don't give them a job. And there was an aha moment probably during that year where the guy's sitting there and he looks bored as can be, and we're getting ready to close and we're going through the closing, and he says, "What's the master?" "Oh, the master's supposed to put him to work and give him proper instruction." I need to put him to work so he's not bored. So that was probably the aha moment was realizing that I'd been stupid and wasn't listening to our ritual as I should, because it tells us what we're supposed to do a lot of times. So,
Most worshipful, thinking about how we're talking and going through in a linear fashion, kind of your journey. Brother Kellerman has reminded us that you had mentioned something earlier on in the conversation, which was a strategic plan. Now, I have had conversations with other past grandmasters from Kansas, like Mike Halloran and folks, and he had mentioned the strategic plan. He's very proud of it. Darren Kellerman said that you were actually involved in the creation of a strategic plan all the way back in 2012. Would you talk a little bit about that, perhaps, and its importance? Because so many Grand Lodges have not the greatest continuity from Grandmaster to Grandmaster. So, do you feel that the strategic plan has been key to the success in Kansas? Anything you'd care to mention?
I think there's several parts of the strategic plan that are important to the success we're having in Kansas. And one of them is the fact that in 2012, I was part of that strategic planning committee. Not the success because I was part of the committee, me, Mike. The success is I was just a rank and file member. I was senior warden of DeSoto Lodge. That's all I'd ever been. I was a fairly new Mason, just a few years in. And I get a call out of the blue that says, we need you to come to McPherson and we're going to meet, and you're part of the Grand Lodge Strategic Planning Committee. Okay, cool. And you show up there and it's a bunch of guys from across the state. Some past masters, some guys that have never been masters, some older Masons, newer Masons, younger Masons. It was just a cross section of guys from everywhere, little towns, big towns, rural communities. And we were sitting around talking about, what is Grand Lodge supposed to do? Who does that? It's not the leadership of Grand Lodge. It's not the Grand Master and the Grand Senior Warden and the Grand Junior Warden sitting there going, this is what Grand Lodge does. It's just a group of Masons from across the state in this room in McPherson, hammering it out, going, I think this is what Grand Lodge should be doing. This is it. This is what Grand Lodge needs to do. And they took that from us, the rank and file guys. And 9 months later, Rick Reichert's up there with his 3 lanes that we gave him from McPherson, like the proudest parent ever. This is his baby now. I mean, he took it on wholeheartedly. It wasn't his plan. It was the plan we gave him. Mm-hmm. But he took it on and he ran with it. And all the programs that are developed from those plans. When the strategic plan was refreshed a few years later, same concept. Rank and file members from across the state came together. It wasn't the Grand Master and the Grand Senior Warden and the Grand Secretary, and they're going, this is what Grand Lodge does. No, it was just rank and file members going, this is what our Grand Lodge is supposed to do for our lodges. So
in other words, y'all listen to the constituency.
Yeah.
And the way it's supposed to be. This is, it's mind blowing, I'm sure, for a lot of Masons who may be watching from around the country, because by and large, I think Grand Lodges likely have strategic plans, but I don't necessarily believe that they're come up with the same way.
Right.
And this is very important. We always like to say Grand Lodge is the membership.
Absolutely. I'm not Grand Lodge. And in 2 weeks, I'm not even Grand Master.
That's a fantastic point. Now, kind of jumping back onto course here of learning your experience, we've talked about going through the officer roles and even to the point of operating as master of the lodge, jumping up a level, getting some involvement into Grand Lodge and the workings, serving as a district deputy and an area deputy. For one, some people watching this may not know, because I've seen in many jurisdictions there is no such thing as an area deputy. There's just district deputy. However, I want to get kind of your opinion or your memories there on what impacted you in that time as a deputy to the Grand Master, and how did that affect your overall experience to this day?
So if I could, I want to drop back to one more thing that happened
Yeah.
with the strategic plan. And it's probably why I decided that when I was asked to take on roles at a higher level, at the jurisdictional level, that I agreed to. And it was that realization that these people weren't paying lip service to us at this committee. They were taking what we gave them as the plan, the mission of the Grand Lodge, and taking it on as true leaders of the craft and executing on it. And that's when I decided, if an opportunity comes up, I can be part of that group. That's those people are doing something I can help with, I can get into. And if this is their attitude and this is the type of leaders that they are, I can be part of that group. And so that was an important step going from lodge to jurisdictional, was that meeting and how I saw true brothers taking on leadership roles because they wanted to serve the lodges and the craft in Kansas. Not because they wanted titles, not because they wanted fancy jewels. It was they were doing it out of love of the craft and wanting to serve. So
definitely, I love that. So kind of bridging that and talking about the implementation of strategic plan,
yeah.
Basically the membership's voice being put into action. You know, one thing we've heard a lot from Right Worshipful McClarty is the aspect of servant leadership.
Oh, absolutely.
So we've touched on that, and we've also touched on the fact that an unpopular side of your time in the Grand East has been upholding the rules and
Yeah.
governance that have been put into place. How do you balance that factor of, for one, going and doing that servant
Yeah.
leadership of what your current constituency says, but also holding up the factor
Sure.
that constituency has put into place that may not align with the two?
I think they can align. I think it's pretty easy to align them, actually. I can give you two examples. One would be Parsons Lodge. So Parsons Lodge was defunct. They hadn't met in years. The master that was holding them together was an area deputy. He passed away unexpectedly. And so I knew they had lost basically the only leadership structure they had. The district deputy called me and says, "Hey, Mike, I went to my district deputy visit and only the secretary showed up." Okay, that's not good. So I'm going to be down in that area. I'll stop by Parsons Lodge and see what's going on at the next meeting. I sent everybody in the lodge a letter, email if they had emails, postal service if they didn't have emails, saying Grandmaster is going to stop by a visit on such and such a date. That's it. I showed up. Not even the secretary showed up. The door was locked. I couldn't even get in. So the rule part of me said, this lodge is done. I really have no choice but to arrest their charter at this point. When they can't even have one person show up when the Grand Master is coming to visit, this is no longer a lodge. It doesn't function as a lodge. It doesn't meet any of the minimum requirements of a lodge. But I didn't immediately arrest the charter. I set up another meeting, sent everybody a letter that said, brothers, the future of your lodge is in your hands. I will be there again at your next meeting. The date and time is this. Please come to the lodge and let's discuss the future of your lodge. They had a quorum. They had 5 people show up. Nobody there from the lodge could open. They didn't know enough of the ritual to even open or close the lodge. I sat in the east. We opened lodge, had a frank discussion with them about their lodge and what was going to happen. Brothers, I have the arrest warrant in my pocket. I have not signed it. Because you 5 showed up as a quorum tonight, I will not sign it tonight. But how you act moving forward will determine the future of your lodge. They were going to go dark. I said, you have 2 months until your next stated meeting. You have to have a quorum at your next stated meeting. Period. You have to have a quorum. They didn't have a quorum. They only had 2 people. I arrested the charter. It upset one guy severely. That was one of the unmasonic times. He went on quite a rant and a tear about it. And that's okay. He flat asked me, what have you done to help my lodge? And I said, brother, I live 4.5 hours away. and I've been to your lodge twice. You've only been to your lodge twice. 98% of your members haven't been to your lodge in years. So what people didn't understand was I wasn't arresting the charter to shut down the lodge. I was arresting the charter because then we had other resources that we could put into play. The area deputy comes in and can help out and build things back up. I can do different things with dispensations and go around, if you will, some of the other requirements. So within 2 months, we had 14 members join that lodge from that county. Labette County Masons came together and said, we do not want Parsons Lodge to fail. We will join that lodge and support it. 14 members joined that lodge. They elected officers. The officers were capable of opening and closing. They had a quorum for 3 months in a row. I rescinded the arrest. I mean, I wasn't acting out of spite.
Right.
That's that balance between here's the rule, follow it, and I'll help you get to where you need to be.
Definitely.
And we got them there. They've done not going to remember the name of it. One of the other appendant bodies, one of the smaller ones, Sword of Bunker Hill. The Sword of Bunker Hill just did a presentation at that lodge, had one of their meetings at the lodge, and brought a lot of people in for that. So there has to be that balance, and I hope I found that balance in most cases. One lodge was upset because they met on the 4th Mondays. Well, our bylaw says you have to meet on or before the 3rd week. You can't meet in the 4th week. You have to meet on or before the 3rd week. And so I went and visited with them. I'd sent them a letter that said, the bylaws say this. I'll come and we'll talk about it, and we discuss it. Well, we worked through, well, here's what we would like to see the Grand Lodge bylaws say. You know what, brothers? That's great. I will help you write that bylaw amendment to change it. And not only that, because you have put enough effort forward that you're going to help change this bylaw. Maybe it'll pass, maybe it won't. I'll give you dispensation to meet during the 4th week for the rest of the year, and we don't have to worry about it. There's give and take, right? There's brotherly love, and as long as we can work through that, and the other entity is willing to put out effort, there's always common ground that can be found. So those are 2 examples where I think, forcing the issue of the rule and then finding that brotherly love and that common ground where, okay, there's a gray area here where we can meet and maybe change the rule, or maybe it's not quite as strict of a rule as we thought it was, or whatever. It's not about being punitive. That was never the case.
For sure. I'd like to bring up a topic that, I mean no disrespect, towards you or your lodge, but I think it's important to kind of show this point here that you're not just going after lodges and upholding, regulations to hurt anybody, as some may have thought. There was a time in your Masonic career that I know has been brought up as a joke here and there, but in the time it's happening, it wasn't a joke.
No.
And I guarantee, put you in a very uncomfortable position.
Oh, yeah.
And this was, of course, when you had to press charges on your lodge, which included yourself.
Yes. If
you'd be comfortable and wouldn't mind, would you explain and give us a little bit of insight on that?
Okay, for one last time, and then we're done with this forever. we can stamp it in the history book and put it to bed. All right. So I was a Grand Lodge officer, and I was master of Pomona Lodge at the time. And we had a Grand Lodge function, so I couldn't be at our stated meeting. They were voting on plural membership of a brother, and it just went off the rails. It didn't go as planned. Stuff happened. I get a phone call like 2 hours later from 3 or 4 different members of the lodge telling me, hey, so-and-so said this and did that. And well, what I find out is that basically one brother before the ballot gets up and says, I'm going to blackball this guy. Here's why. Okay, can't do that. So one guy's in trouble. Well, then they ballot. It turns out, as you would expect after somebody makes that proclamation, and they all get into the discussion about how they balloted, why they balloted that way, why did he think he should ballot this way? Just a complete discussion about who balloted and why and how. You can't do that. We read the dang bylaw right before you ballot that says you can't do any of that. And so I have people calling me, telling me, hey, guess what? We committed an offense against the body of masonry. There's like 5 places in our bylaws that says this is an offense against the body of masonry. That's one of them. I'm like, all right, well, the whole lodge is in trouble. I'm the master. I'm responsible for these actions, even though I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. I sat on it for like 2 weeks, and finally, a couple days before our next state of communication, I filled out the paperwork and sent it to the Grand Secretary and filed charges for unmasonic conduct against everybody that was at the meeting and me as master, because even though I wasn't there, I'm still responsible for the actions of that lodge. And Tracy Bloom responded, I don't think you can do that. I go, well, I just did. And then I was Grand Senior Deacon. So Cole Presley, the Grand Master that appointed me, calls me and goes, what in the hell am I supposed to do with this? I go, I don't know. You're Grand Master, not me. So there's rules for a reason, and we're supposed to be following them. And when we don't follow them, there has to be consequences. And again, this is a time where those consequences turned out being very good. We had to have a special meeting with the Grand Lecturer and the area deputy, and we went over why we say the things that we say in that bylaw. Quite frankly, some of the wording in that bylaw is so arcane, we should probably look at updating that bylaw so people, when we read it every time we ballot, we actually understand what it says. That'd be fabulous. That'll probably be on the agenda for me to work on next year. But we went over, what does this bylaw actually mean? At what point should have the senior warden, who was in charge of the meeting, actually acted and shut it down, right? Because it spiraled completely out of control. And so it was a great learning experience for everybody involved. It really became something that even the guys that were really mad at me, they were like, sorry, Mike, we misunderstood what you were trying to do. I had one guy come up to me and he goes, you're just trying to make a name for yourself. You're trying to become Grand Master someday. And I'm like, well, I'm already appointed Grand Senior Deacon. I don't know how this helps. I really don't. Filing charges, Masonic charges against myself probably is not the most helpful thing I could do to become Grand Master someday. So, but anyway, yes, it's who I am and it's how I work. And we have rules and regulations for a reason. And if you don't follow them, unfortunately, there are consequences sometimes.
I would just like to say for the record that I will bet in several generations when a relative of likely Alex Powers goes back and is fascinated by reading the Grand Lodge minutes and comes across this entry, they'll have an episode on this and pull it from the archives.
They can play the recording. They don't need to call me.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, we had a question from Brother Anthony, and this is kind of prophetic. As a Grand Master, you've sat here, you kind of know the issues that are going on in Freemasonry. He asks, now I want to preface this by saying he didn't say negative or positive, so feel free to spin it how you like. What new issues, either way, do you think Kansas is going to face in 10 years?
Interesting. I've been so focused on the here and now that and the short term, I don't think I've looked 10 years down the road, and maybe that's a shortcoming on my part. It probably is. You should ask me this question like 9 months ago. Come on now. 10 years. I think it's we're just on the same path for the next 10 years. Probably it's the decrease in membership due to rural communities collapsing. As far as things changing in society. I think it could be good or bad. It could go both ways. We see this emphasis on technology and these types of meetings and things like that, and the society where the kids are just in their phone and that's all they ever do. And if we continue down that path and that's all we know for the next 10 years and everybody's okay with that, well, that's going to negatively impact masonry. But if we continue down this path and this is all we know for the next 10 years, and all of a sudden a group of these people go, I'm done with this thing in my hand. I want to be around some real people and have some real friendships and relationships. That's going to be a boon for this fraternity. So it's hard to judge where that's going to be. So I think the best thing we can do, no matter how those things turn out within society and all the issues that we're facing within society and economics and all those things, war in Ukraine, whatever, is position ourselves to take advantage of whatever comes our way. And that means that we need to provide value to the members, value to the people, that they see value in masonry and want to join masonry because there's value there. If there's no value in being a Mason, then nobody wants to join masonry. And unfortunately, for 6 decades, we have focused on cheaper, easier, and bigger. And cheaper, easier, and bigger has not added value to our fraternity.
You sound like Dwight L. Smith.
Thank you. It's not about cheap. It's not about easy, and it's not about being bigger. It's about being Masons. It's about being valuable to our communities, being valuable to our members. And that's easy to say, but it's hard to do. And one of our shortcomings, and we have to fix this, one of our shortcomings is we don't ask our new initiates what they want out of masonry. If we don't know what they're looking for, if we don't know why they joined, then how can we give them the value that they want? And we have to figure this out. We have to talk to these people. Sometimes what they're looking for is not what masonry is, and it's okay to tell them, brother, you or friend, whatever, maybe you should join Rotary. Maybe you should join the Kiwanis. What you're looking for is what they do, and you will find more value in that than joining masonry and being upset with not finding what you want. It's all a value game. We have to provide the value that people are looking for. We have to set ourselves up to provide that, to take advantage of whatever comes our way in the next 10 years. It could be across the board. It could be, economic strife. It could be war. It could be the LGBTQ issues that are creeping into masonry from time and again. All these things are going to impact us over the next 10 years. We just have to be the best we can be and provide the most value we can provide.
Very well put.
That was a good way to tiptoe right around all that one.
So we do have one question here on my list, and it was in, I guess, relation to an article that you wrote in the Kansas Mason some time ago about one-day classes.
Oh.
And I want to use that as kind of a spark point to, I guess, allow you to give your opinion on one-day classes and what they've done to Freemasonry and where we should go in the future with them, in your opinion.
They have stolen the initiatic experience of becoming a Mason from hundreds of thousands of men across this country, and we should stop stealing from our brothers.
Very well put. Within that thought, I know in my time in Masonry, and no one here, so we don't have to worry about it, but I've heard a Grand Master say, it's a numbers game. We need members. Nothing else matters. And we've seen the one-day class pushed in that perspective. Obviously, in today's world and moving forward, our numbers are an issue. They're a very real concern. And looking at statistical projections, that's going to get worse. in the defense of someone saying, and we've had this pushed in one format or another of moving in this direction or making it easier to become a Mason for this reason or that reason, what is your response to people when they bring up, we need it for membership to just turn them out?
When there were 150 Masons in Kansas and 3 lodges, we felt strongly enough that Masonry was going to survive that we created our own Grand Lodge. So why are we focused on these numbers? These numbers that we are focused on. Sorry, we're getting into my remarks coming up here for Grand Lodge, but we'll get into a little bit. We have been fighting the specter of these numbers for 6 decades. This ghost has haunted us ever since the end of World War II. Anybody that knows the true numbers understands we were never going to win that battle, because what we had was 4 or 5 years, a very short period of time, where we had a huge spike in initiations and raisings, and it after 4 or 5 years, it almost immediately dropped back off to its historical norm. Okay, so we caught this huge number of Masons right after World War I and again after World War II, and then went back to this historical norm of raisings. Okay, well, the Grim Reaper is the one that we're fighting, and we can't win this battle. We could never win this battle. This was never a sustained number. 4 or 5 years of huge increase coming in, right back to where it always used to be, and our membership curve followed it. I get it. We've created these big business theories, and we have to have all these numbers to support our charities and to be able to afford our buildings, and numbers, members. We have to pay for all these things. We don't. That's not what Masonry is about. Masonry is not about buildings. Quite frankly, it's not about big institutionalized charity. I like the fact that we have a institutionalized charity. I give to it. I support it. I think we do great things with it. But at the end of the day, that's not Masonry. It's something we're able to do because of our Masonic affiliation and the things we learn in Masonry. But those charities, those buildings, these things are not Masonry. Masonry is us, brothers, getting together, learning from each other, learning from our ritual, having fellowship, becoming better men, better people, better husbands, better leaders. And I don't really give a shit if there's 300,000 of us or 300 of us. Masonry in Kansas will survive. And it's probably better if there's 300 of us that understand what Masonry is and can build from that foundation than if there's 300,000 of us that don't understand what it is. I'm not worried about the numbers. If we do what we're supposed to do, if we be what we're supposed to be, if we're Masons, if we act as Masons and we teach and treat each other as Masons, the numbers will be what they're supposed to be. And I don't know what that number is. I don't know if it's 30,000. I don't know if it's 3,000. We do what we're supposed to do as Masons, and the number will be what it is supposed to be, period.
Very well said. So in that thought, we have kind of successfully worked through your Masonic career, and we've addressed a lot of topics so far that you've dealt with during Grandmaster and leading up to that point. In your experience within the Grand Line, pre-Grand East, what are some things, some key happenings that occurred that I guess helped you with where you are today?
Well, so we'll go back a little bit because we were talking about my aspirations, and I can tell you that this was a key point when I figured out that I wasn't always catching on to what was going on around me sometimes. Sure. And it actually helped me understand a little bit more of the process, because there was a time in, I don't know what it was, when Lynn Byer was Deputy Grandmaster. And Lynn came to me, and we were in the Grand Lodge, an office building, doing something. And he's, "Hey, Mike, what are you doing for the next 3 or 5 years? What's going on in your life? What's going on?" I'm like, "Heck, I don't know, Lynn. Pam's off in California. Her job's there now. I don't know where she's going to be living. My kids are going to graduate high school, and I won't be tied to Kansas anymore. I can probably move and live with my wife." And And that, I don't know what I'm going to be doing for the next 3 or 5 years. Okay. End of discussion. I was like, well, that was really weird. It's very strange. Just out of the blue asking me what I'm doing for the next 3 or 5 years. And then it wasn't, but maybe 9 months later, Cole Presley stops me at Leadership Academy and says, hey, Stoops, what are you doing for the next 3 or 5 years? And I went, oh, okay, I get it now. So there was no aspirations. And actually, there was so little aspiration that I didn't even catch on the first time I was asked about something like that. So just that thought process of, oh, they asked me when I don't think I ever put out any, maybe I did unconsciously, subconsciously. I don't think I ever put out any vibe that I wanted to advance in leadership. I was just doing what I was asked to do and doing it to the best of my ability and loving doing it. And for these guys that, I loved as brothers and these guys with true leadership, the servant leaders like Cole and Darren, Rick Riker, these guys that I just admired the way they led the craft. To even see something in me was amazing. So that was, I always aspired to live up to their standard of leadership. And I know I have a different leadership style, but I know that looking back on the way they handled the craft has probably helped me temper my leadership style, to find that common ground, to not be the battle axe all the time, to find the solutions, to help the brothers, not just to punish people, right? That's my go-to is probably, here's the rule, follow it, here's the consequences. And the rest of the leadership team that I have worked with has helped me become more temperate and understand that we have to find that different path that's right for masonry. And that's not always year out. That's let's work with them. Let's bring them back in. Let's do what's best for the brothers and the lodges, and let's do what's best for masonry. And that comes from true servant leadership from the heart. And Darren, I'm looking right at you, brother.
Now, in leading up, I guess going through your time in the Grand Line, approaching your time now in the Grand East, we went through a big change in Kansas Masonry with the sale of our Grand Lodge in Topeka.
Yeah.
If you could, I want to get, because you were going through with the COA and hearing a lot of those background decisions, and then ultimately, we recently had made the sale and now moved to Emporia. I want to kind of get your impression on that process and how the craft was impacted.
I don't actually think the craft was impacted. I think the craft thought they were going to be impacted. But at the end of the day, how many of us went and visited that building? It was a beautiful building. I love that building. I actually did all the work behind the scenes for the capital campaign that we started to kick off, all the pledge drive and all that we started to kick off. I was actually the guy that was doing all the behind the scenes work on that. So I saw the numbers. I saw the pledges that came in, and we were looking at a $5 million campaign. 6 months in, we had $85,000 worth of pledges. 75% of those pledges came from the Council of Administration itself. And just between you and me and the fence post and the brothers here, and I guess the rest of them for historical purposes, my wife and I pledged $30,000 of that $85,000 that was pledged. I wanted to keep that building. I would have loved if we could keep that building.
Right.
Having a big building with a huge overhead, with maintenance issues, does not meet the vision and mission, does not meet the mission and vision of Grand Lodge. The purpose of Grand Lodge as an entity has nothing to do with maintaining a building. It just doesn't. I don't know how you can play it into that being part of Grand Lodge's what it's supposed to do. I wish we could have kept it. I would have loved to keep it. At the end of the day, unless the money was there, that wasn't going to burden Grand Lodge in the future for the overhead and costs, it was an albatross. And I'm glad we got rid of it for that reason. If I win the lottery, Grand Lodge will have a building again, and it'll be that building. But until I win the lottery, I think we're in Emporia, and that's okay. Yeah. We really don't need anything other than a couple offices. The function of the Grand Lodge really only requires a couple offices. That's it. So yeah. When I win the lottery, we'll have a building.
So just to add in for, I guess, some historical concept, anyone watching back on this or out of jurisdictional viewers watching in that may not know the whole story, I can attest to attending multiple, Grand Lodge annual sessions leading up to that. And the, very bluntly put, this is where we're at. This is the red line. This is what we need. And it was brought up, raise dues. Do you want to, well, first it was brought up, do you want to keep the building? You get an unprecedented yes. Do we want to put more money towards it? No. Well, how do you meet those two? So I totally get that. Within that factor, one point I would like to bring up is, unfortunately, the loss of space for our archive and museum. And I want to get your opinion. Obviously, as we've touched on, for the overall mission of the Grand Lodge, well, I guess we'll leave that in the question too. For the overall mission of Grand Lodge, do you see it as an importance to maintain an archive and museum? And also, what is your opinion on the future of it? And will anything happen with it? Will it remain in storage, et cetera?
Yeah, an archive, absolutely, yes. It is within the mission of Grand Lodge to maintain the archive. It needs to be accessible, either digitally, or we need to be able to retrieve those items as we need them, as people want to see them. No doubt about it, the archive is part of Grand Lodge history. The museum stuff, as neat and nice to hold some of that stuff was. I mean, I got to hold a dang blunderbuss, a Spanish blunderbuss that somebody found buried under a fort in I don't know where, because it was part of our museum. Okay, well, it was really cool. It was neat to have. Doesn't have anything to do with masonry. So there's a big portion of what the museum was that doesn't have anything to do with masonry. The history of some of the things that we had there, I struggle with. I mean, they're neat from a historical point of view. They're nice to have. They're nice to be able to see. Oh, this was the medal that they gave at the 1919 dedication of the Grand Lodge building that we don't have anymore. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. I'm not sure it really has a place. I mean, who other than you and me and a couple other historical geeks, who wants to go look at that stuff? Nobody came in there. It was so rare that anybody ever looked at any of it. I think that if we're going to do anything with the museum portion, it needs to be very tailored to an audience that we know is going to look at it, and maybe needs to be part of the Kansas History Museum. These are and we need to tie it to Kansas history. These are the Masons that had an impact on Kansas masonry, and here's some of their Masonic things as well as some of their personal items maybe, and tie it to Kansas history. That way, it's not just you and me and one guy from Texas that want to look at it every 6 months. So I think if we're going to move forward with the museum, it has to be something like that. And it's got to be in conjunction with a university, a college, an established museum somewhere. Grand Lodge cannot go freelance out on its own and create its own museum. It's not going to happen.
I actually love that concept that you brought up of, mixing in with established museums and state history. We often, it's a weird example, but we often see, local libraries and stuff will do like a section devoted to certain history or something like that. And that would be a neat factor across the state in a manner to not just preserve the history, but get it out there to viewers that in other means would have never came across it. I do want to selfishly also use that point to promote the Kansas Lodge Research digitization program that's been strong at work. We're actually bringing our kits to Grand Lodge this year and handing them off to the next 2 lodges. So we are getting a lot of those lodge level records digitized for future. And hopefully one day that will be worth something to somebody, but got to do it while the time is there.
Yeah. Well, the paper hasn't completely deteriorated.
So we've kind of gotten to the point of you approaching the Grand East.
Sure.
And before we get there, in Kansas, you are elected as Grand Master with the obligation of serving as a Deputy Grand Master for 1 year. I want to get your memories, thoughts on your time as Deputy Grand Master, but also your opinion on, and this is a tough one because our lodges don't always have the members to support it, but would a Deputy Master be a smart move in our blue lodges as well?
Let me answer the last one first. Would a Deputy Master be I don't think so. We need to do better at figuring out who the leaders of our lodges are going to be. And we are so reliant on this idea of a progressive line that we end up putting people in leadership positions who shouldn't be in leadership positions. The progressive line, if used properly, is a training tool so that by the time you get to the East, you have learned enough to be a good leader. Being elected senior warden shouldn't be your next rite of passage is automatically you're going to be worshipful master. A lot of people don't like that idea, but there's a reason our first Grand Master in Kansas was Grand Master until he basically told them, if you don't elect someone else, I'm going to dig a hole and shoot myself. That if you read his final statement, that's basically it. I'm walking outside the door here and you will find me in a hole. He didn't say that, but that was basically it. It was like, I'm done, I'm out. But why was he Grand Master for so many years? Well, he was the right leader that the members thought could lead this brand new thing that they had, this Grand Lodge of Kansas, and he did it for 10 years. Why are we so afraid of that now? Why are we so afraid that if we find a good leader in a lodge, that he can't be master for 4, 5, 6 years, whatever he's willing to do? So I don't think adding an extra position helps any of that, quite frankly. So my thoughts as Deputy Grand Master were, that was an interesting year. That takes us right into 2020. What a good old time 2020 was. First of all, I think I was the longest serving Grand Senior Warden since the early days in the 1800s. We postponed, we put off, we rescheduled, we did all the things with our annual communication, and me being elected Grand Master could be probably one of the most contentious points in my career, because there are probably some out there that says I wasn't rightfully elected Grand Master because we had to limit the numbers that were attending the annual communication that year. So we only had 45 voting members at annual communication. We had a quorum, but we had to severely limit the number that were there. So I guess I'm only a week and a half from being done. So I guess nobody's caught me yet. So I guess I'm good. But yeah, so even being elected being elected Grand Master to serve a year as Deputy Grand Master, it started off really strange for me because of that. During the election, C. David Williams, dear brother, had always been the teller. So in Emporia, C. David had passed. And so he wasn't the teller. That was the first year in my Masonic career. That was the first year that C. David didn't get up there and say, "Most worshipful Grand Master, we have an election." It didn't happen, because C. David wasn't with us physically. So even that, the whole start of my last steps to the Grand East were just really, really strange for me. I was installed with wearing a damn mask at the altar. Just the whole thing was surreal. I look back on it and go, wow, look at the stuff we did, and we didn't know. I remember the meetings leading up to that, and it was, do we have the annual communication? Do we not? We didn't know. It was March of 2020. All we knew was people were dying in thousands. It had hit New York really hard. A lot of tough decisions had to be made with, unfortunately, not a lot of knowledge to go on. So we kind of went with, we have to protect our brothers. We're not going to get together. We're not going to do this. When Tony was installed as Grand Master, poor Tony. He was installed as Grand Master with three guys there: the Grand Secretary, the sitting Grand Master, and our PR past Grand Master Darren Kellerman to record that it actually happened, so that people would believe us. But that was it. That was his installation. That was it. He took the oath, got the charges, and the gavel was passed, and Darren recorded it for posterity, and that was it. It was just a weird time. The whole time I was Deputy Grand Master was the COVID. Lot of thoughts in the Council of Administration on both sides of the issue. Very strong opinions on both sides, what we should, what we shouldn't do. Should we meet at all? Should we just, the whole thing's a hoax and we should just go on with our lives as normal? I'm glad I was there to see it, but I wish we never had to, quite frankly. So my time as Deputy Grand Master was just a blur of COVID. It really was. It was no meetings, restricted meetings, boom, annual communication. Oh, look, Stoops closed. It's a tiled session. Who's going to take pictures of him becoming Grand Master? I don't know. Nobody. It's tiled. Don't take pictures. So
that's a good point. And last year's interview of Most Worshipful Tony Borum and kind of went into depth on that COVID issue.
Yeah.
That COVID issue is not over.
No.
But it was also a prominent part of leading up to your role as Grand Master. On a personal level, what were your thoughts of COVID and Freemasonry and kind of how it was going to impact in the future there?
At first, we really didn't know. I recorded a nice little video and sent it to the 9:00 toasts for your other podcast, and that was kind of my thoughts at the time. Was and we were isolated. My wife was working from our house. She had just moved back from Iowa. My son lived with us. My daughter and our two granddaughters moved in with us because she was scared of what was going on. And so now I went from being basically a bachelor at the inn, getting out, doing whatever I wanted, to having my entire family live with me, and I couldn't leave. And I realized that Masonry was still important. So I recorded that toast, and basically it went back to the Grand Master of DC, who said, this thing isn't killing Masonry. Masonry isn't dead. No one told you to stop contacting your brothers. It's more important now than ever to contact your brothers, make sure they're doing okay, see if they need anything. If you have to go to the store, see if your elder brothers, if they need something. I think it could have killed Masonry. And I think in some lodges, it probably put the final nail in the coffin. It probably did. In other lodges, we learned how to communicate better as brothers because we reached out to each other on a personal level. We got these meetings set up. Masonic education started flowing across the entire country. I've attended more Masonic education meetings through virtual platforms in the last 2 years than I attended the rest of my entire career as a Mason. That's great. That's not going to hurt Masonry in any way. And we need to bring that information we get from these meetings back to our brothers at our lodges. But there were good and bads from COVID, absolutely both. Some lodges will never meet again. They're done. They were struggling and COVID killed it. Other lodges have grown. They've seen people want to be together. They're coming back and spending time together. And we've gained all this knowledge over the past 2 years of all these meetings, and we're excited to go tell people what we found out about, whatever it was. And so there's good parts of it. And that's one of the best parts, really. So.
Fantastic. Touching on the aspect of attending virtual sessions, for the Kansas Lodge of Research, it was nothing new for us.
Right.
We've been meeting virtually the majority since 2018, but when COVID hit, we saw Freemasonry in a whole, not just on a lodge level, on a group level, but even grand jurisdictions were saying, from at one point it was, this is evil, we want nothing to do with it, to, hey, this has actually got some viability to it. You mentioned that you had a large impact in, virtual meetings there. What role do you see virtual aspects playing into Masonry's future?
I think it's definitely the main role is going to be the educational portion. When we can get together and educate each other and share ideas, that can't be anything but good. It just advances Masonry. The Rubicon guys out of Kentucky, some of the stuff they put on, just fabulous presentations. The Masonic Roundtable, you guys, Sonic Light. Why not? Why not? I mean, it's there. It's great content. We learn from it. We become better Masons because of it. We have to embrace it. I will never, well, I won't say that. I am currently not a proponent of tiled sessions on a virtual platform. I think the tiled sessions are meant to be something different, and you can't accomplish what they're meant to be on a virtual platform. But you and I've had the discussion, and I've had the discussion with other people, and so have you, Alex, is what are we doing in our tiled sessions? Because they're tiled for a reason. And the reason they're tiled is because we're supposed to be doing things that are not appropriate for the profane, but we tile our meetings, and then all we talk about is our bills and our minutes. And who's going to clean the floor, sweep the, maybe some of the stuff we're doing for Masonic education needs to be back in the tiled sessions.
Most worshipful, to that point, it is interesting. I'll just share a very quick personal anecdote. Back in my year, when I was the worshipful of my mother lodge, my secretary told me, even though we had the ability to open on the first, second, or third degree and conduct business, that we should only open on the third degree for business. I said, why? I want to open up so the EA can come in. And he said, if you do that, he'll have no pressure to continue his motivations to become a master Mason. And my immediate thought was, are you kidding? He already pays bills at home. What are you scared of?
Yeah. It's that value equation, right? If he's part of the group and you can give him something to do and he feels value, he's going to continue. Now just opening it up for the sake of opening it up so he can be in the meeting, I don't think that's what you meant. I think you wanted to bring him in and be inclusive of him as a member.
Exactly. Yeah. And even perhaps stick him on a committee for something to improve the lodge or something, get him involved.
Yep. Absolutely.
So at this point, we have covered the mass of your Masonic career. It takes a lot to get through an entire Masonic career. And, there's obviously so much we haven't touched on, but we're at the point now of you entering into the Grand East.
Yeah.
What many perceive as the highest rank in Masonry, as high as you can go. That's a big deal. we touched on the Grand Temple in Topeka, and I've heard from a good source that in your preparation of approaching the Grand East, you spent some time there on numerous occasions, in that museum library room with all the pictures of the past Grand Masters on the wall, seeking some wise counsel. If you
I
wouldn't
don't,
mind
I don't
delving
know
a
if
little deeper on that.
I don't know if I was seeking it, but it was definitely the ghosts were whispering. That's for sure. So it was just, so I was helping out. Some stuff needed put together for the annual reports, and so I went to help out. We were spread it out on the tables in that big room, and around three of those sides of the room there were the past grandmasters portraits, and just knowing that I was appointed Grand Senior Deacon at that time, hadn't taken the position yet. That's a lot of weight. That was a lot of weight in that room. All those guys staring down at you, hoping you could do as good as they did or better, or leave the craft better than you found it. And yeah, it was a good time of contemplation. I think that's the best way to put it. It's a good time of contemplation.
That's a great way to put it. Now, I want to prompt everybody as we're entering into the phase of talking about Grandmasters, Most Worshipful Stoops' time as serving as Grandmaster, and a lot of those points have been addressed. That does mean that we're getting towards the end. So if there's anything pertinent on your mind that you want to ask Most Worshipful Stoops, now is the time to get those remaining questions in. So my brother, as you entered into your time as Grandmaster, and obviously it was a tiled session, so there's only so much we can probably talk about, but your installation, I guess you could say, was a little different than we typically see. I want to give an opportunity for you to address why that was and why it was important for you to bring back some of the historical aspects that you did.
Well, I think it was a lot about some of the articles I'd written during COVID, where it was rebooting, not just sitting idle during COVID. I wrote articles about rebooting your lodge, coming back better than you were when you shut down for COVID, things like that. And with that thought process, I went, let's get back to our roots. Even if you look at what I did as Grandmaster with the laws, rules, regulations, and usages, our obligations, our charges, that's getting back to our roots. That's getting back to the foundation of what we're supposed to be doing. And so I thought it was only fitting that I go back and see what I could find on how we used to install the Grand Lodge officers. 89. I don't remember exactly now, but it was the first printed version of the Grand Lodge installation, and it's in our annual proceedings. I went back and found it, and I basically adapted it to present day. So it was a tiled session. Only master masons. Actually, we were on the first degree, so I guess entered apprentices could have been there. I caught a lot of flack from several people, including a few well-liked, well-loved past Grand Masters that were upset that my wife didn't get to see me installed as Grand Master. And I can tell you, my wife was absolutely okay with that. So I had one past Grand Master that he's like, well, it's a tiled session. Who's going to take pictures? No one. It's a tiled session. You're not taking pictures. And he says, well, how are you going to remember your time at the altar when you took your obligation as Grand Master? And I said, the same way I remember my time at the altar when I took my obligation on the first, second, and third degrees. There aren't any pictures of that either. So it was just something I wanted to do to get back to our roots, our foundation. There were some things that didn't go as planned. I'm sure that question is going to come up, so we'll go ahead and cover it now. I think my first and probably my best decision as Grand Master the entire year was as Grand Master, I determined that 1 was equal to 3. And I did that right off the bat. Like 20 minutes into the procession around where everybody was supposed to give me a salute in the Grand East, and we got once around, and I was going, once is good, we're good. And so instead of the 3 times around, we only went once. So I think that was probably the first, and I could have stopped there and I could have been a hero. 1 equals 3 as Grandmaster and walked away a hero right there. That would have been it. So
I do remember that evening very well, and we were all very thankful when we heard 1 equals 3 shouted out from the corner.
yes.
But with that said, it was definitely an impactful ceremony. One that I had read about, but one that I had never seen.
Yeah.
So obviously had not, known it in that fashion. To see that and experience it and participate in it firsthand was extremely impactful.
Yeah.
But yeah, with considering the number of brethren that were there,
Right.
the first time it happened to this time, it was a very slow moving line.
Yes. And it was supposed to be set up where like a group of 15 or 20 would all step up at once and then continue on. And it was one person at a time was doing it. And it wasn't executed well on my part. So we'll leave it at that. So
Most worshipful. I wanted to ask you, Brother James Woods asked early on this evening, probably the first question asked. He asked really a 3-part question. You've addressed a couple of them, but I'm curious on his last point, which is we talked about the continuity issue between Grandmaster to Grandmaster, a strategic plan. With those things in mind, what are you leaving on the trestle board for the next Grandmaster?
Sure. So I'm really not leaving anything because it's all part of the system and plan and programs we have in place. But what is coming up next is the Lodge Accreditation and Certification Program will continue. It was supposed to kick off a year earlier, but with COVID, it just kind of got a rough start. So we implemented it in full last year, and it will continue. And there are some punitive things that come with that. If lodges do not improve, if they're at the lower rung of that, and they're not meeting the bylaw requirements of a lodge, we're getting to the point where the punitive aspects of that program start to kick in. That's one of the things that continues on through the next years. It's a continuous process. I mean, I know that I went back to 40 schools of instruction, one for every district. And I know that the discussion, and we're already changing that for next year, that there were some issues with doing that. And the next group has decided that they're going to combine a lot of the schools next year and try to get better attendance at the fewer schools that we have. So I wouldn't say I'm leaving anything, but we're continuing on the path that we started. And that's one of the great points of having the strategic plan. I did take this year and assigned each lane of the strategic plan to a different member of the Council of Administration. Mike Johnson doesn't have a lane, but the next 3 guys actually took on one of the 3 lanes of the strategic plan, and they're in charge of implementing those things within the plan. So it's just an ongoing process. It has been working fairly seamlessly, and I think it'll continue.
Fantastic. So entering into now, you're assuming the role of Grandmaster. Obviously, we see through the years that results in a Grandmaster's stutter design, token, pen, and wearing your tie this evening took on the symbol of the beehive.
Yeah.
Which resulted in a beautiful tie, which I love this one because this jacket that I got from my father-in-law kind of matches it. So
right.
It's just perfect. But it's a
so
beautiful symbol.
You can be like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and wear it inside out.
Exactly. There you go. Crisscross. Yeah. Inside out.
So
a fantastic symbol. And I want to get your aspect on why you chose the beehive and especially how do you think it fits so well right now?
Yep. So we're gonna hear all the secrets of the beehive right now. So the beehive came about because I asked my friend Patrick Craddock to develop this challenge coin, and I said, Patrick, I want the level on the challenge coin. That's what I want. My challenge coin has to have a level on it. And he goes, well, I don't want to put a level on a square coin. Okay. And of course, Tony Borum had already had a triangular coin the year before, so I wasn't going to do a triangular coin. And I said, man, what what shape does that fit on nicely? And he goes, well, how about the beehive? So that's how the beehive came, but because the level fit on the beehive very nicely. And since that time, the level, although it's Kansas Freemasons on the level, and that's absolutely the truth, and I will never go away from that. But the beehive kind of took over, and it became the dominant feature throughout the year. So that's how the beehive was developed, was because I wanted a coin that had a level on it, and I didn't want it stuck on a square coin.
See, and that's why we hold these interviews, because stories like that would never get out.
But
so the other fashion is, coming into your year as Grandmaster, we saw a pretty substantial change in the image of the Grandmaster. Kansas over the years has had very flashy aprons and collars, and you approached in a different fashion. I want to give you an opportunity to describe what you started out the year in and why.
well, we're not actually going to go into all of the true details behind all of that, because those are Masonic secrets held on the square. But I will say that I absolutely loved the fact that I was installed with a pure white lambskin apron and the breast jewel. The reasons leading up to why that was made possible, that's the secret part. But it didn't upset me at all. I absolutely loved it. I'm glad I didn't have to answer for why I'm doing it, because that's what I wanted to be installed in. I'm Brother Mike. I mean, this coin says Brother Michael J. Stoops, GM. I can tell you that I was forced to put GM on there. It was just going to say Brother Michael J. Stoops. The original design said Most Worshipful Michael J. Stoops. I said, no, get that off of there, brother, because that's when I was first met at the altar, it was brother. And when you put that sprig of acacia along with my body in the coffin in the grave, it's alas, my brother. It's not alas, most worshipful. It's alas, my brother. That's what I am. I'm Brother Mike. And you know, the white lambskin, it drives me nuts. We give it to the candidate, and we say, wear this with pride and honor, and you know, it's yours, wear it. And we tell him that, and then after take it home, and you got to put it between two pieces of white paper, and you got to put it in your sock drawer so it lays flat, and make sure your wife knows where it's at, because when you die, that's when you get it out. No, it's your white apron. You're supposed to wear it. And so it's who I am. It's my expression. It's my outwardly expression of who I am. I'm Brother Mike.
I love that. So now moving into your acting year, I want to give you the opportunity. We've obviously touched on some of these aspects, but thinking about what we haven't talked about, I want you to bridge your experiences and triumphs throughout your year this year as Grandmaster of Kansas.
I'm happy that Parsons Lodge came back the way they did, that the brothers of Labette County came together to support that lodge and save it. That's not a personal triumph for me. They did that. I didn't do that. I struck a spark, and they kindled the fire from the spark. So that's definitely something I'm proud that they did while I was serving as Grandmaster. I hope that my message of I'm not Grand Lodge, that every past master, sitting master, and sitting officer of the lodge is Grand Lodge. I hope that message sticks. I hope that we never forget that lesson. Because thinking that the Grand Master or the Council of Administration is Grand Lodge is detrimental to the craft. It's absolutely, if the Grand Master thinks he's Grand Lodge, or if the craft thinks the Grand Master is Grand Lodge. Either way, it's detrimental to the craft. I'm not Grand Lodge. Council Administration is not Grand Lodge. Everybody who's a voting member in this state is Grand Lodge. And I can tell you, I first said that out of frustration because I was at a meeting and I was tired of getting the, why is Grand Lodge doing this? What's Grand Lodge going to do about that? Blah, 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 Grand Lodge, Grand Lodge, Grand Lodge. And I was finally like, I'm not Grand Lodge. There's 18 of you guys in this meeting right now that are Grand Lodge. I have 1 vote. You have 18 votes. If there's something that you think Grand Lodge should be doing, you can outvote me all day long. And so, although absolutely spot on that we are all Grand Lodge, it truly came from frustration one night. But what I saw was an immediate change in the attitude of those brothers. They realized that I was right, that they are Grand Lodge. How can you be mad about something that you have full control over? And it clicked with them. It just clicked with them. You could see it on their faces. And although, attendance at this Grand Lodge annual communication is probably going to be lower than what we've seen in the past, and I'm sure that's because of COVID and other factors like that. If we see what we saw at Leadership Academy, that thought process and those ideas that I am Grand Lodge, that we have control of what happens within this jurisdiction at the membership level, I think that's one of my biggest triumphs right there, was just getting everybody to realize the truth of the matter, that they are Grand Lodge. And don't be upset if Grand Lodge is doing something you don't like. Go fix it. You're Grand Lodge.
Well said. One big change we saw this year was the number of trees Most Worshipful Michael Stoops killed. No, I say that in jest. We received a lot of notices from the Grand Jurisdiction. I want to give you an opportunity to speak on that.
It's pretty simple. When the Grand Master is asked to answer a question regarding laws, rules, and regulations of the fraternity, his answer has the force of law within this jurisdiction, whatever it is. So in the past, Grand Masters have been asked questions just like I was. Well, Grand Master, bylaw XYZ, what do you think this means? We can actually cook donuts on Saturday if it's raining outside? Well, the way I read it, I think you can. Okay, well, that has the force of law within the entire jurisdiction.
That's a good point.
Well, we've been a little remiss in the past about not communicating when those decisions were made. And so when the Grand Master would say, yes, you can cook donuts on the 3rd Friday in June, as long as it's raining, the rest of the lodges didn't know that. All I did was, when I was asked a question, and quite frankly, a lot of times I didn't want to have to answer them, but there's no one else to ask. I answered the question. It gained the force of law by me answering it. And so I sent out a communication to everybody and saying, hey, I was asked this question. Here's my research of what I found, why I'm answering it the way I answered it. And here's my final decision on it. And I'm informing you because guess what? It has the force of law. That way we all know what we're working off of. That's all. I was just communicating. Those decisions and those answers had always been done and made. I just communicated them. That's all. That's really the difference.
And that brings up such a fascinating point, because I have to commend you for the amount of work in that one area alone that you did in your time as Grand Master. For any other of you out there who want to be nerds like Most Worshipful Stoops and myself, if you go back through our annual proceedings, there is a section in there for every single Grand Master of the decisions they've made. Yeah. Reading through those is very insightful as to how and why our Grand Lodge is structured the way it is. It gives justifications as to why they thought that way. So getting those in real time this year was, I think, the biggest difference. And personally, I loved it. While I know others saw frustration in reading them or whatever, we, as we bridged earlier, frustrations about enforcing laws, to abide by them, you need to know what those laws are. So I think it was actually a very impactful move to have those sent out in real time and to actually have them read. I think was huge for our jurisdiction. So I definitely commend you on that.
Well, I think the frustration was that I was actually communicating those decisions, because I could have made exactly all those decisions and never sent anybody a letter about them. And 99.9% of the Masons in Kansas would have not even known I made a decision, and they would have been fine with that.
There's a lot of that most worshipful in a lot of jurisdictions. For instance, we have brothers in several different lodges across the country where there's confusion about a decision that a grandmaster has made, whether it was an official position, an edict, or something. Does it expire when his term is up? Or, there's all these things. And when you take the added step that you have been taking by communicating it abroad to everyone, you're actually cleaning up things and getting rid of any misconceptions. So it's a huge step in the right direction.
Well, I hope so. I think there's still some misconceptions. Those rulings and interpretations I made do not end with my term in office. If my annual report is accepted by the voting body of Grand Lodge, those rulings and interpretations still hold the power of law. It's not like an edict. The edict expires at the end of my term. The rulings and interpretations live on if accepted by the body of Grand Lodge. Now, a future Grand Master can reinterpret it and change that, but that's has the force of law past my term, which I still think many people in this jurisdiction are misunderstanding, because I have a feeling there's a few lodges holding off on some degrees because they think they're going to put 15 guys through as soon as Mike Stoops isn't Grand Master. So
not today, fellas.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you, there's a two-part question. The first is we kind of know where you stand on this, but Brother Michael Smith said, when can the York Rite organization expect a petition from the Grand Master? If you need a signer, he might know one. But in a serious way, I do want to ask this question because this, and you don't have to answer it, but you probably will because you're that kind of guy. When we think about quote unquote high degree Masonry, you have made it no secret that you're a symbolic lodge guy. You've really dedicated yourself to that. Have you experienced any headwinds related to the fact that you're not in some of these bodies, like, political things, have you experienced this? And I obviously no particulars, but you have then.
Yeah. I've been pressured to join other organizations, and my answers are pretty simple. One, I'm completely covered up with what I'm currently doing. I don't have time, and I will not just join something to have a membership card in my pocket. And two, if I really get pushed on it, my answer quickly becomes, look, I am solely focused on the foundation of your organization. Whatever your organization is, York Rite, Scottish Rite, Shrine, whatever, Grotto, all of them. I am solely focused on the foundation of your organization. Because without the Blue Lodges, what are you? So isn't it okay to have a leader that is 100% focused on making sure the foundation of your organization is sound? And that's usually the last of the, that's usually it. That's all. I don't get much pushback after that one. So
I wouldn't have anything. Yeah, that's a good one. Mic drop.
There you go. So I'm definitely going to give you an opportunity to go through any points that we might have missed for you to address, but I do have two questions kind of final on my mind for you. For one, what advice will you offer to the incoming Grand Master? And then part two is, what's next for Michael Stoops after Grand Lodge?
Oh my. So the incoming Grand Master, I would tell Mike to make sure he seeks counsel. I did it throughout the year. Those decisions you saw me write up I didn't come up with those on my own. I researched them. I sought counsel from history. I sought counsel from jurisprudence, from other past Grand Masters, from other jurisdictions. How do you handle this? Masonry doesn't operate in a vacuum. You don't take that obligation at the altar as Grand Master and whoa, as much as I'd love that, it just doesn't happen. So seek counsel on everything. Communicate with everybody. If people don't know the rules to the game they're playing, they will make them up on their own, and they're usually not quite right. So communicate, just communicate, and stay focused on our mission and vision. Everything we do has to be measured by that mission and vision. And if it doesn't match the values there, if there's not something that matches up, move on. That's what the craft told us we're supposed to focus on. And if that's not what we're doing, we're not being true to what they told us. So what's next for Michael Stoops? Boy, I wish I knew. Yeah.
There's a tradition in a lot of lodges where you start over again.
Oh, is there? Okay. Well, I guess I could join co-masonry and start over in co-masonry. I don't know. That's a joke, boys. That's a joke.
Ooh. Oh man.
I mean, if you truly want to start over in masonry, you have to go back to the entered apprentice degree, right?
That's true. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair point.
All right.
It's a fair point.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure I'll be around. I'm sure I'll still be behind the scenes doing a few things with the electronic digital stuff. There's a line item, a $20,000 line item, I believe, on next year's budget for the Grand Lodge that is a outward facing educational campaign. I may have a little bit of something to do with that in the future. So I'll be around. As far as my personal life, yeah, all bets are off. I've got everything from my wife wants me to go get a full-time paying job to I kind of like you being around the house cooking and cleaning for me. I don't know.
Well, we have been going at this 2 hours now.
Wow.
And I'm sure we've only bridged the surface how can you really go through an entire Masonic career and not an entire Masonic career. As we said in the beginning, not trying to kill you off after this, but up to this point, there's a lot of information to cover. Any final thoughts?
I will say that from a historic research standpoint, I've been very cognizant throughout the entire year to document everything. I have probably the most extensive Grand Masters digital folder in existence right now, and every communication to every lodge, every communication to the DDGMs, it's all in there, date stamped, and so I love you. I had the question on one of the other programs was, are we missing out on history because of digital communication? And we absolutely are. All those archives of all those letters that were sent between Grand Masters and different people that we have on file in our archives that we can go back and look at, we don't have those for the last 10 or 15 years because everything was done electronically via email. It's gone. So almost all my emails are digitized. And so I kind of catered to the history nerds out there. So hopefully somebody doesn't hit delete on that.
You caught me off guard there. You just mentioned that we have records in the archive of all the letters from Grand Masters.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Yeah, there's stacks of them in there.
Tracy is going to hate me for the next some while.
Yeah,
Alex, give me a call. I'll come down.
Yes.
I'll bring my Caesar too, and we'll get it done.
Yeah, I don't know what some of it was already digitized. I don't know what was digitized and what wasn't. But anyway, But
That's fantastic.
That's my little love you to all you history guys. Is I wanted to make sure it was documented.
But that is fantastic to hear. You know, not to jump into, you know, my show or anything like that, but my efforts into Masonic history, one of the biggest things I've always put out there is, as we're recovering and preserving that past, one of our biggest faults is we fail to see today as tomorrow's history, which ultimately puts us in that same point for our future brothers trying to catch up as we've been trying to catch up, because we're not documenting now. To hear somebody like you in that position taking the time and effort to put that into place, I commend you so much. And that alone is a huge service. I personally want to thank you. It's been an honor to serve under you. Very excited to see you in person next week, shake your hand.
Yep.
But thank you so much for coming on this evening and giving us a insight into your personal life, your Masonic life, and this entire trip thus far. It's been fantastic. And I just want to thank you for all you do to the craft of Masonry, my brother.
Thank you. Just do my best and do what I can. That's all I've ever done.
I want to give a opportunity to everyone here joining us still. If you have any final questions, comments, throw them in now, and we'll make sure we get those read.
I want to point out a gavel right here, Darren.
Well, it doesn't look like I have anything coming through for questions. But again, to echo Alex's sentiments, thank you, Grandmaster. You have absolutely been a gentleman, a scholar, and a Freemason through and through. Thank you for everything that you've done for us so far, and laying a wonderful foundation to you know, not laying a foundation, but you know, improving it.
Patching
and
it
moving
up.
us into the and moving us into the right direction, setting an example for quite a number of other grand jurisdictions around the world that can look to Kansas as somewhere where, you know, you've had some successes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to remind everybody that the session has been recorded. If you are a member of Kansas Lodge Research, you will be able to, within the next day or two when I get it in there, you'll be able to access that members archive and recap on this video. Obviously, we have touched on so much this evening that you might want to go back and touch on again. Some brothers had to drop off a little early, so they will be able to, of course, see it that way as well. If you are not a member of the Kansas Lodge Research, that is all archived and in there. So if you are interested and kind of like what we do, this is the general format of our meetings. We meet once a month and have speakers from around the country, around the world come on here, and we do Masonic education. Well, we kind of do split meetings. 1 month is Masonic Ed. We call it virtual education. We'll have a speaker come on, traditional format. And then the following month, we will do a roundtable discussion where we present a thought-provoking topic. And as a group that show up, we work through that topic, and usually leads to a very edifying conversation for all present. All those are recorded and in that archive. So if you join Kansas Lodge Research, you will have access to all of those plus future meetings. And we have an extensive digital archive available and growing all the time that is great for your research needs as well. So I invite you to go to kslor.org and explore petitioning the Kansas Lodge Research. I want to thank everyone that has joined us this evening. And again, thank our most worshipful brother, Mikel Stoops, for joining us this evening, and all you have done this year and all the years leading up to this year for our craft. And we look forward to seeing you next week at Grand Lodge.
Yes, absolutely.
With that, brothers, thank you all so much. Have a great night.